No evidence of that at all. Those were miraculous gifts given to the apostles. Tongues are a sign, that's a miraculous thing, complete miracle for unbelievers. That's what it says in 1 Corinthians 14. Tongues are not given to everybody. Do all speak in tongues? Absolutely not. So the notion of all nine all the time is fundamentally false and needs to be corrected. Some people had that gift of language. It should always be called the gift of languages. It was an absolute miracle in Acts 2, where God is saying, here's where my activity is. Guess what? In the audience? No. In the apostles, 12 or 120, doesn't matter which, who were supernaturally speaking up to 18 different forms of language, unlearned. Now, when Peter gave his sermon, he didn't continue to speak in those foreign languages. No need for that. So it's a myth to say that this was for purposes of communication. It was not. Because Peter later preached in Greek, probably, or Aramaic Greek, probably. Everybody knew Greek. It was a sheer miracle. But today, the attempt to reproduce that sheer miracle is really quite sad because it's done in the closet, never comes out of the closet, contrary to 1 Corinthians 14:13, which says that the one who has that gift, not everybody, is to come public with it and translate it or have it translated. It hides. So nobody in the tongue-speaking, the language-speaking world really knows what or if they've spoken a real language. I'd go easy. You may say to God, what am I doing here? What is this that I call the gift of languages? Better not to be self-deceived. At least check it out. He, of course, learned Greek to go shopping in Sepphoris. Of course he spoke Aramaic when Mary called him into lunch in Aramaic. And certainly he knew Hebrew from the synagogue. That's just obvious. That's nothing remotely connected with the gift of languages, which is a sheer miracle. And the people heard the apostles speaking their native tongues, that's to say, the people's native tongues. It wasn't a miracle of hearing. That's not what Luke says at all. It was a miracle of speaking. Note the sly way in which the King James mangled all that by adding the word speaking in other languages. It doesn't say other languages, I think. They added that word. The tongue speaker is commanded here not to remain forever silent in the closet. It might do him some good, but it's not the ultimate aim of the tongue speaking. So in the 13th verse, the tongue speaker, and it's not everyone, when he says, I want you all to speak in tongues, he means, of course, those who have that gift. He's just finished saying, do all speak in tongues? Absolutely not. You get that clear first. Are all prophets? Completely not. Do all speak in tongues? Absolutely not. I should say speak in languages. No, they don't. But he wants all that have that gift to be able to do it, provided that it is inspectable by being translated. Otherwise, you don't know, and people don't know to this day if they've ever spoken a foreign language. And then people say, well, I heard of one example in India where apparently somebody was understood as a language. So what? Makes not the slightest difference to anybody. So the issue is it true that you're speaking in real languages? If it's not true, then you should check very carefully. Otherwise, one might be indulging in a form of self-deception. We don't want to do that. So the great key is that what is tongues about? In that same chapter we were just looking at, it's a sign. That's an unmistakable miracle. So you say to yourself, is my tongue speaking, my language speaking in the closet a sign to unbelievers? How is it? It apparently is not. So the whole chapter must be taken into account. I would say this then, there's no such thing as a permanently untranslated language gift. It's supposed to come out and be translated so that we can hear what you're saying. And if you're doing it that way, then you're on a level with prophecy. Now, the wider question is, did those gifts really continue? Hebrews 2 says that God confirmed the preaching of Jesus about the kingdom. God confirmed it to us, the readers of Hebrews, with signs and wonders and various distributions and gifts. And the writer of Hebrews doesn't seem to imply that they themselves are still confirming it. So what if God wants to confirm the initial thing? Does the house shake when you pray? Probably not. When's the last time you saw tongues of fire coming out of people's heads? You probably haven't seen that. That's all right. What about the fact that apostles alone, at the level of the 12 that is, only those apostles have signs and wonders? Under the auspices of those apostles, you might have an occasional Philip, an evangelist who does miracles. But I don't think it's realistic to expect that degree of the supernatural to go on now when you don't have apostles at the level of 12. So think at the level of 12. Think hard about that passage in Hebrews 2, verses 3 and 4, because it seems to imply a modification, if not a complete cessation. Paul, in fact, doesn't say when those gifts are going to end, except to say that will be when we see Christ face to face. He expected that very soon. He doesn't discuss the issue of as to whether they have to go on being exactly alike until Christ comes. All he knows is that when Christ does come, there'll be no need for any of those gifts anymore.